Hey everybody, it's Dan, and I have here a game I played on ChessCube a few weeks ago, which I wanted to post. The game was a 5-minute blitz, and I know that this means the game might not present much educational value for review, but I'm analyzing it for a few reasons. One, I've been playing Blitz exclusively for months now because it's quick and easy and usually all I have had time for. Two, even Blitz chess can be improved. And three, there are some nice tactical shots that I felt could be good to learn from. So let's get started. I'm playing in this game as white. To start, we have e4, g6, and while I can, I push a second pawn into the center. My opponent fianchettos, and I develop the knight to put another defender on d4. My opponent goes for a double fianchetto setup here, which is not the most common setup, and after the bishop plays to c4, to make way for castling, I play knight c3 and defend my e4 pawn. Now my opponent starts to play in the center with e6, and I castle. Here, black plays knight h6, and I quickly play my bishop to e3 with the idea of getting a battery going on the diagonal with the queen and the bishop, and ultimately taking out the dark square bishop, which would leave the dark squares around my opponent's king very weak. But I think actually in this position, a better move would have been maybe h3. This does two things. It creates a flight square for my king, which is always good, but more importantly, it's limiting the knight's scope. It's on the edge of the board, and after h3, the only square it can play to is its home square. Now, this would be a temporary inconvenience, because black here could play f5, and then the knight can now play to f7, and my center is coming under attack. At the same time, however, f5 is weakening the king side, and at a time when the queen side still needs some development before black can castle long, so black might even be running the risk of getting caught in the middle of the board or weakening its castled position preemptively. So anyway, h3 in this position is just a thought that I had. But in any event, that was not what was played. Instead, I played bishop to e3, and black castles. I put the queen on d2, forming that battery, and now the knight jumps to g4. From here, I move the bishop to f4, and here my opponent made a mistake and pushed e5 right away. Seeing as this was a blitz game, it's understandable these things happen. But obviously in this position, I have enough attackers on the e5 square that I just win the pawn, and then try to get the dark square bishops off the board. And in this position, my opponent played a very interesting move, d5. Now, when I saw this, I immediately began thinking of all the ways I could capture that pawn. But I also was extremely mindful of the fact that my queen was opposite black's queen and was unprotected. I'm sure many of you know Jerry over at the Chess Network, and he says all the time in his own videos that unprotected pieces lead to tactics. Specifically, the tension between the dark square bishops could be very problematic for me if I don't handle the situation properly. In the game, I immediately exchanged the bishops because I was aware of the pawn on d4 being the only piece defending the bishop and shielding my unprotected queen. As it turns out, given my material advantage of one pawn and the free pawn I was being offered, I believe I made a good choice. Other variations I was able to come up with had me either losing my material advantage, albeit with a great center, or actually going down a pawn. One line could have been, I take the pawn right away with my knight. From here, bishop captures on e5 does lead to a pin on the knight, but if we follow through for a few more moves, I end up with 3 pawns for the piece. Now, it's difficult to say who stands better. Yes, I have a great center, but it might not be too difficult for black to undermine that center with its extra minor piece. Also, keep in mind that before this variation, I was actually up a pawn, and now the material has been equalized. One important feature of this position to note is that black's dark square bishop is now gone. Another option for me would have been if in this position right here, bishop captures on d5 was played. I can recapture with the pawn. And now if bishop captures e5, I undouble my pawns and I'm up 2 pawns with lots of space in the center. So either way, while I played cautiously in this position here, mindful of my unprotected queen, taking the pawn could have worked out well for me. However, since it was blitz, what I was most afraid of was something like knight captures on d5, and from here, if I played the most natural looking moves, I would end up going down a point of material, because the bishop captures on d5, And then here, instead of the pawn, the most natural looking move to me anyway, is bishop captures on d5 again. c6 kicks the bishop back to b3, and from here, bishop captures e5, exploiting the pin the pawn is in. Now, this last sequence may not be the best play on any given move. Obviously, I don't think it was because I came up with that other variation. But again, given the fact that the game was blitz and these were the most natural looking moves in the position, I very easily could have wound up in a worse position. So anyway, to get back though to the actual game, in this position here, after d5 for my opponent, I decided immediately just to take the bishop and only then capture the pawn with my knight. So now I'm decisively up 2 pawns. From here, the knight develops to d7, and I play c3 to shore up my center, and a6. This is directed at harassing my bishop, supporting b5, so I put a stop to that with a4. Now the queen jets out to h4, which looks scary, but is actually only threatening the pawn on e4, since black doesn't have enough attackers in the vicinity to cause me a problem yet. So I just push f3 to protect the pawn, and here my opponent again plays a bad move, c6, chasing my knight to a square that it pretty much already wanted to go to anyway, c7. Now from here, the knight is forking the rook and the pawn, and to hold on to the pawn, rook to a7 was actually needed. But this would have resulted in an even more uncoordinated position for black. The rooks are no longer connected, my knight is deep in black's position, and the queen is in a good position but lacks support. Instead, however, after knight to c7, black plays the most natural looking move, rook on a to c8, attacking the knight, but then there goes a6, and now I'm up 3 pawns. Since black is down material here, they avoid the exchange of more material after bishop captures on a6 and instead play rook on f to d8. I take the opportunity to keep my knight on the board, and after the pawn pushes to c5, the knight ends up back where it started on d5. Here, black takes the pawn, but this allows me to hit a check with the queen on d5. After f6 blocks the check, I again played conservatively when I didn't have to. I was afraid of the rook being opposite my queen, so that even though I had enough attackers on b6 and could have taken it, I was afraid of this position right here. Now, at first glance, this looks, of course, very strong for black since the knight and the rook are hitting my bishop and my queen is under attack. But of course, I could just take the knight here, and if the rook captures c4, queen captures d8, and I'm up enough material for this to be a one game. However, under blitz pressures and being afraid of tactics, I decide in this position here just to offer queen exchange on f2. My opponent does well, of course, to avoid the exchange, but plays not a very good move, moving the queen just to g5. And after f4, the queen is now forced to h6. Now here I want to talk briefly about studying games. It's obviously very important to learn from your own mistakes when you study your games, but learning from your opponent's mistakes as well can be very beneficial. In this instance, this sequence of moves loses time for black. Since the queen ends up on h6 anyway, to avoid the queen exchange, in this position here, it would have actually been more efficient for black just to play to h6 immediately. And this is a lesson I try to keep in mind in my own games, although I don't always do it successfully. When I move pieces, I try to be aware of tempos that can be gained on my pieces. Tempos end up losing time. For anybody out there, a tempo is when a weaker piece attacks a stronger piece, forcing the player with the stronger piece under attack to spend an extra move to save that stronger piece. So in this case, the tempo was in this position here after queen to g5. The pawn is attacking the queen. Obviously, the queen has to react, and the queen goes to h6. So anyway, like I said, tempos end up losing time. So when I have to move a piece, I try to move it to a square where it will be able to stay there for the next few moves at least. Here, the same principle applies to black. Just move to h6 right away, and now black has an extra turn compared to how things turned out in the game. But, of course, in the game, black ended up losing the tempo here, and after queen to h6, I move my rook on a to d1, contesting the only open file. My opponent here played a move that, for a blitz game, looked appealing enough, but actually failed tactically after that rook move. If you'd like to, pause the video and try to find the move that my opponent played, and then try to find why it actually isn't good. Okay, the move played here was rook captures on c4. While it does pick off the undefended bishop, it fails tactically to knight captures on b6. Now black's knight is in a pin since the rook left the back rank, and the knight is hit twice and defended once, and the rook on c4 is also hit. Black played rook captures e4 here, but now I just crashed through on d7, and at the end of it, I'm still up 3 pawns of material. Here black pushed g5. I'm not quite sure why, maybe hoping I would take and the queen would be back in the game somewhat. I don't really know, I couldn't find any logic behind the move or anything that it was trying to achieve. But instead of reacting to the pawn push, I ignored it first and hit a fork on c5. The rook ran back to the 7th rank to protect the bishop, and before capturing the bishop, I played f captures g first. And here, black made the final blunder of the game, and instead of queen captures g5, f captures g was played. Now, had queen captured g5 been played, the resulting position probably would have come about. And here I'm still winning, but the game isn't over. However, if we back up here, after f captures g, now it's a mate in 4. Pause the video if you'd like and see if you can come up with a solution, but I'm just going to go ahead and show the answer. So the mate in 4 starts with queen to f8, check, and after king to g6, instead of queen captures e7, rook to f6 check, king to h5, queen to h6 check, king to g4, the only move, and now queen to h3 checkmate. So in this game, I was actually able to play all the way through to this checkmate position. My opponent did not resign. So that's the game. I hope you enjoyed watching me go over it. I learned a few things from this game. One, it's not always a bad thing not to take pawns. While there were a few pawns I could have taken in this game but didn't, I chose to go with a more solid position, and in the end, this served me well. While it's tempting, especially in blitz games, to go chasing after material, and while material certainly is important, pushing a positional advantage is no less key to a win. 2. When moving a piece, try to anticipate where it will have to move if it's attacked, in order to save time on moves, as in the case of my opponent's queen near the end of the game. And 3. When you see a good move, look for a better one first. After queen to f8 check, queen to e7 capturing the rook surely would have been winning, but not as cleanly and decisively as in the game. Instead, a little patience and rook to f6 check led to the mate. Anyway, thanks for watching. Comments, questions, and ratings are always welcome, and take care. Bye.